Hello, RotoBallers, and welcome to the Fantasy Football Playoffs. The real season, it begins this week, and we are here to help you get one step closer to those fantasy championships. With that being said, here are my must-start running backs and tight ends for week number 15, and let's hit the ground running with those running backs. You are starting Joe Mixon this week versus the Minnesota Vikings. On paper, this doesn't necessarily look like a great start. The Vikings have been allowing less than 18 fantasy points per game. They just held Josh Jacobs to under 40 yards rushing. But Mixon and Chase Brown have totaled 408 yards and 4 touchdowns over their previous 2 contests. As for Mixon, he had 125 total yards on 23 touchdowns last week against a very solid Colts run defense. He also accumulated 20 fantasy points on the ground. We continue to see Mixon involved, especially down on the goal line where he had 5 carries inside the 5, which led all ball carriers last week. He's also seen 15 carries in the red zone over the last 4 weeks. Brown, he saw a season high 30% of the rushing attempts. However, the important goal line carries, those still belong to Joe Mixon, and that's where fantasy points are made. Now, my number 2 running back, I don't know why I have to keep putting him on here, but people are still not drinking the Rashad White Kool-Aid. This week, he goes against Green Bay, and once again, if we look back to last week, he finished as a top 5 fantasy running back. When are we going to learn? 21 carries, 102 yards on the ground, 2 catches for 33 yards, and a touchdown in the passing game. Everything in the passing game is just an added bonus right now. White is a must-start option from here on out. Don't overthink it. If it isn't broken, don't fix it. White is rounding into one of the more complete running backs here, especially in recent weeks. We all know he has that pass-catching upside, but in the last 3 weeks, he has averaged 6.7, 4.3, and 4.1 yards per carry, and this week's matchup against the Packers features a defense that is allowing the second most rushing yards per game, 141.8, so another productive fantasy game on the ground is expected from White. As for the third running back I'm starting, and maybe this one's a little bit bold, maybe it's a little bit out there, I'm going with DeAndre Swift versus the Seattle Seahawks on Monday Night Football. It has been a bad couple weeks for Swift. I mean, really bad. 2 weeks ago, 13 yards on 6 carries. He followed that up last week with 39 yards on 11 carries. I get it if you're not ready to get back in behind Swift here, especially in the playoffs. But both San Francisco and Dallas, they are top 5 run defenses, not only in the NFL, but in fantasy as well. Seattle, on the other hand, they are allowing over 30 fantasy points per game to the running back position. And Christian McCaffrey, as good as he is, he had 145 yards. That's great, but he only had 15 carries. That's insane. DeAndre Swift, expect maybe not similar production, but very viable RB2 here in week number 15. As for those running back sits, I'm going to look at the other side of the field here, and I'm going to feature Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker. They have to face a very tough Eagles run defense. A defense that comes into this one ranked 6th in rushing yards allowed per game this season. With Walker returning from that oblique injury there in week number 14, he was a non-factor against the 49ers, carrying the ball 8 times for 21 yards, which happened to be his 3rd time in his last 4 games in which he failed to reach 25 rushing yards. Meanwhile, Charbonnet had just 44 yards and he had 1 more carry than Walker did. Now, while this run defense for the Eagles is stout, their pass defense is one of the worst in the league, allowing more fantasy points to quarterbacks and wide receivers than any other team. This could be one of those games in which the Seahawks forget about the run altogether and just throw the ball around the field. As for another running back that I'm sitting, it's Raheem Mostert versus the New York Jets. Mostert, he's coming off a great game there in which he ran the ball 21 times for 96 yards and a pair of scores. He also had a 65% snap rate and a 75% rushing attempt rate there, which is some great utilization. However, this matchup against the Jets, it's less than ideal. The Jets at this point have nothing to lose, and New York has allowed just 112.7 rushing yards per game over the last 3. Third running back that I'm sitting is James Conner versus the San Francisco 49ers. We have seen this 49ers team completely phase out both DeAndre Swift and Kenneth Walker in recent weeks, and the fear is they can do that to Conner this week as well. That said, if there is a team that is willing to continue to run the ball, even if it's not working, it is the Arizona Cardinals. Now, over the last 4 weeks, the 49ers have allowed less than 16 fantasy points per game, just a single touchdown to go along with 348 total yards to backs. So it's going to be tough sledding, even if Conner does get some volume. Now, let's look at those tight ends here, led by my starts and Isaiah Likely versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. He is coming into this one hot. A 5-catch performance there that resulted in a touchdown, 83 yards, and more importantly, 19 fantasy points against the Los Angeles Rams. More on that Rams team here in a second. It's important, trust me. This week likely faces a Jaguars team that is allowing 14 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, and we just witnessed David Njoku posting 27 fantasy points thanks to his 2 touchdowns and 91 receiving yards against that Jaguars defense a week ago. My second tight end I'm starting, I mentioned that Rams defense. Logan Thomas gets on this list because the Rams, they're not good when it comes to defending tight ends. I told you it was important to listen. Only 5 teams are allowing more fantasy points to tight ends over the last 4 weeks than the Rams are. And only the Texans, Broncos, and Bengals are allowing more than the 14 fantasy points per game this season than the Rams have allowed. Los Angeles, they have yielded 773 yards and 63 receptions, not to mention a league-high 7 touchdowns to tight ends this year. And the third start this week, it's Okonkwo versus the Houston Texans. Don't look now, but Okonkwo was involved in this Titans offense on Monday Night Football's win over the Dolphins, hauling in 5 of 6 targets for 46 yards. Teams have targeted their tight ends 113 times this season against the Texans, resulting in 84 receptions and 800 yards, which works out to 14.14 fantasy points per game. Now, how about those tight ends that I'm sitting? And this one, I'm going to put out there. It's going to be bold. It's Travis Kelce versus the New England Patriots. You aren't sitting Kelce, I get it. You probably think I'm crazy for even suggesting it, but temper those expectations against a Patriots team that is allowing just 8.63 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends over the last 4 weeks. That's the 7th fewest. On the season, they are allowing just over 9 fantasy points, which is the 5th fewest to tight ends. They've given up only 1 touchdown all season long. And on this Chiefs team, outside of Rashad White, they haven't shown that anyone can take a team's attention off of Travis Kelce, except maybe Taylor Swift. But I don't really picture Bill Belichick as being much of a Swiftie. Kelce is still the tight end 1 in fantasy, but that gap is closer this year than in years past, as he hasn't topped 95 receiving yards now in 6 straight games, and he has been held out of the end zone in 5 of the last 6. The second tight end that I'm fading this week is Evan Ingram versus the Baltimore Ravens. The Jaguars tight end has put together a couple really nice games in a row, scoring 3 touchdowns in his last 2 after previously being held scoreless on the season. This week, he's got a couple things working against him. The matchup is tough. It was tough last week, I'll give him that, but this Ravens team, they are allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points to tight ends this season, which makes it a difficult matchup, and Trevor Lawrence may not be able to protect himself from this Ravens pass rush, which further complicates things. And the third tight end you're seeing this week is Dalton Schultz and or Brevin Jordan, whoever's in the lineup for the Texans as they take on the Titans. The Titans are allowing just 8.33 fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks, which is the 6th fewest, and they've held tight ends to 161 yards. On the season, they've been even better, allowing less than 7.9 fantasy points per game and holding tight ends to 520 receiving yards through 14 weeks. And they're the only team in the NFL that has yet to concede a touchdown to the position. Tank Dell is out. Nico Collins is likely out this one. CJ Stroud is on concussion protocol. Add that all up, and it doesn't look good for Schultz or Jordan this week. That's it for this week's show. And as a reminder, this video is being recorded on Monday, so plenty can still happen between now and Sunday's kickoffs. We got games on Thursday, we got games on Saturday, and we got games on Sunday and Monday. So make sure you are checking out RotoBaller.com and the RotoBaller Discord channel for all the latest fantasy football news. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure to hit that like and subscribe button right here on the RotoBaller YouTube channel.